This tutorial will show you how to make simple India ink trees perfect to put in a monochromatic landscape. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button and support this public school teacher's side hustle. India ink is great to work with because you need very little supplies and it's very inexpensive. I'm painting on watercolor paper. You can also use a smooth Bristol, and I have a paint palette and just a off-brand India ink. I am adding water to a nearby paint well next to my ink and taking my small round brush and adding just the tiniest amount of ink to create a light gray. I always recommend when using ink to start with your lightest value first. You should practice doing a value scale probably before doing this. I'll put one in my description box. And I'm trying to use my paint brush to tap a textured light value triangular shape, and then I'm going to overlap with more of a light medium or medium gray. You don't want it to look too perfect like a robot painted it, so think maybe it's darker on one side and let the organic shape really speak for itself. Let's add a little bit of a darker gray here, giving it just a little bit more of a shadowed look, focusing on that one side. And now for a tree trunk, taking my small round brush, I'm going to pull up. That creates a nice base, and then adding just a little bit of grass or land or something that anchors the tree to the page. Let's do another tree with a slightly different shape. I'm going back to that light value. You can see I made a third section on my palette, and then I'm going to, using a very similar brush stroke, let the wet on wet technique of the medium gray kind of blend in organically with the light gray. Here comes the dark gray. I'm going to add a little bit more to that first tree since it doesn't seem as dark as this one, giving the trunk a little bit of attention as well, trying to add it without making it look too robotic. And this one, I want to have a rounded shape and a tall trunk. And you can see the pulling up motion makes the trunk wider down at the bottom and then get a little skinnier as it goes into the leaves. Adding a couple little side branches here, making sure that they look nice and natural. And then just the tiniest bit of something that will anchor the tree and make it not look like it's just floating. Adding a little bit of that dark gray value. Notice I have not used black once. I've used all range of gray. Gonna add even this dark gray back in there again. And now let's darken it up even more. Still not jet black, but it gives that nice kind of shadowed look. Adding it to the first tree as well, just a little bit down at the base. The name of the game is value. The name of the game is contrast. Seeing if I can add a little bit up more on the tree. Giving the edge here just a little bit more attention. It looked a little too perfect. We want it to not be too round. I'm going to try a different brush stroke this time. I'm going to, instead of kind of dabbing and tapping, I'm going to pull to create the illusion of longer branches or just a different style of leaf. So you can look at different trees as you're painting this. I highly recommend that you have a reference image in front of you and you practice different styles of trees because each one will have a different look. A trick I tell my students is to Google watercolor tree, find some that they like, put it in a Google Doc or a Google slide, and then change it to black and white. There's just more watercolor examples on the internet than India ink, and then that gives you the same watery style, but just in black and white. And sometimes it's hard to see green and see it as light gray or dark gray when it's dark gray, green and light green. So that takes some of the guesswork out for you. As I did with my first two trees, you can see I'm layering very gently with my round pointed brush. I've had students experiment with fan brushes and flat brushes, but when I work this scale, and this is pretty teeny tiny, I just tend to reach for the small round brush every time. Finally getting a little bit of dark gray here, trying to follow that pattern that I created and swoop. There is my delicate tree trunk. I try to avoid a really thick tree trunk, and then I'm going to go back and keep building till I get to that darkest gray. Another trick is to let everything dry and come back to it and layer again because your grays are going to dry a little bit lighter than you think they will. So that's another thing, is to do more than one session. The top of the tree is very important. I want to make sure it has that nice little point to it. And since this tree is levitating, let me give it a little bit of something down at the bottom, just an indication that it's connected to the earth, which you will do if you ever paint a landscape. You would do that based on what part of the landscape it's in. Let's get it just a little bit darker, adding on to the central point and then kind of fanning out. And I always kind of go back and revisit the other trees and see if they need a little more attention too. 3 is enough for now, but if I was practicing for a large scale landscape, I'm sure I would do more. Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me. And if you're interested in more India ink tutorials, check these out. My website, thatartteacher.com, has full-length lesson plans, student examples, ideas for paint night, and anything to help you teach or learn more about art.